Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today, we will be talking about understanding your attack surface and improving your security hygiene. More importantly, we're going to dig into how it can be done both automatically and continuously. My name is Ulysses Canlis, and I'm a product specialist here at NorthStar. Today, we'll also be joined by Kevin Saucier, who, in addition to being our primary architect here at NorthStar, is also a seasoned compliance expert. And finally, our special guest for the day is Matthew Plord. And so, Matt, I will let you go ahead and introduce yourself because I probably won't be able to do justice for you.
Oh, sure. My name is Matt Plord. I've been a cybersecurity consultant for over 22 years. And the last decade or so, I'd say I'd focused pretty much exclusively on vulnerability management and the data that surrounds that. Most recently, I have been with an energy company under NERC audits.
Thanks for the intro, Matt. So with your history in information security and specifically vulnerability and exposure management, seems like you recognize there were quite a few problems to address at the organization. So what type of technology were you looking for, and what did the process look like to address those problems?
Yeah, so the first use case that we looked to tackle with NorthStar was around something I call IT tool coverage. In the world of NERC for the energy company, you are mandated to have certain security tools on your critical assets. And so in the world of energy, I would say it's a little different though. I was thinking about this last night a little bit and how it does differ. In energy, we do something which is called a self-report. And this may sound strange to other industries, but let's say, so I'm on the security team at the energy company, I run the security program, and let's say I find something that's out of compliance. I report that to the governing body, to NPCC in my region, which is the Northeast of the United States, but I report it to NERC and it's called a self-report. It's a very self-governing kind of industry, which is a little bit different, like I said, than other industries. And so with that in mind, the process that I came into when I was hired into the energy company was we were constantly seeing violations on our security tools. So we uncover some dark corner of the network and we're like, oh, well, here's this critical system that doesn't have antivirus, or here's this critical system that is not sending its logs to our log aggregator, or here's this critical system that hasn't been patched. And so we'd find those things and it was causing so many self-reports that, the self-reports are good because we get credit from NERC but they're bad because we had so many of them. So the process that was put into place before my arrival was every quarter, a team would get together and do a complete deep dive, like no errors in this deep dive. They would get data from all the different security tools that were in scope for NERC. They would cross-reference that with the asset list, and then they would find the gaps and correct them. And this was a quarterly thing that happened all the time. Took many hours. On average, throughout the course of the year, probably about 18%. Like if you just look at one person's time, probably about 18% of their total workload throughout the year. And so large manual effort. And it just made sense to bring in a tool that was good at aggregating and normalizing data. And I had worked with NorthStar in the past for vulnerability management. And so I decided to bring it in just to solve this specific use case. The amount of time that it saved was greater, and it improved our accuracy and and our security posture. Because if you're doing it every night instead of every quarter, and it's done automatically by a system rather than manually with eyeballs and spreadsheets, you're going to get better accuracy and you're going to improve your security posture because you're doing it nightly rather than quarterly.
One of the things that's interesting about that point is that you're talking about a very specific use case of NERC, but realistically, the process behind that is going to be something that's applicable to almost any organization that has regulatory requirements. But even outside of the regulatory requirements, the ability for an organization to know and also ensure that their security tools are installed, are being managed properly, is something that's going to be a benchmark for pretty much any of the typical IT security standards out there. Um, we've worked with a lot of organizations that have used this type of effort and this type of process to try and ensure that they actually are meeting those regulatory requirements.
Yeah, that's a great point, Kevin. In my past, I've also helped clients through post-breach analysis and figuring out what went wrong, where did the security break down, and without naming any names, and actually utilizing NorthStar, we've come in and helped them shore up that gap. So you might read about some of these breaches in Wired magazine or wherever you get your cybersecurity news, probably not Wired, and they'll talk about the vulnerability that was exploited or the kit that was used or however they did it. But at the end of the day, what you're going to find in most cases, and what I've personally found in most cases when I've done these root cause analyses, is that it was a very simple thing. It was a tool wasn't deployed to one machine. A tool wasn't being updated. It was like out of date. It had fallen out of the security tools management sphere. And so what you're going to find with NorthStar's ability to aggregate that data daily is it really shores up your security posture, because all these tools are preventative and they're there to make sure you don't have a problem. And so an ounce of prevention is worth a ton of cure. And that's certainly true in cybersecurity. So just having that health check that you don't have to like pay a company to do on a monthly or quarterly basis, just that health check that happens automatically in the background. It's so valuable.
Yeah, I mean, even beyond just even beyond just an official effort of having somebody, having an outside firm come in and do that. I mean, just the ability to automate that process and relieve that resource contention that a lot of organizations that we work with that they end up having. They have good intentions of wanting to do this, but they just don't have the bandwidth. That there's only so many hours in a day and only so many hands to do the work. So any efforts that can be used to automate that process is usually a huge win for them.
Yeah, and you're talking about like a manual process that, it provides value and great value. However, if you have a resource that you're spending money on, whether it's an employee, a consultant, whatever, you'd rather have them doing the tasks that bring more to bring their eyes onto more security relevant issues. Like they weren't hired necessarily to merge data into spreadsheets and figure out where the gaps are. They were probably hired for their analytical skills and for completing projects, security projects in your environment. And so getting them off of this base manual stuff and putting them on to the higher level security tasks is also improves your security posture.
Yeah, we refer to that as let technology solve easy problems and let people solve hard problems.
That's a great way to put it.
What were the other pain points you were seeing with the existing process when you first started?
Yeah, so aside from the vast amount of time that it took my resources to complete this task, I mentioned it earlier, the accuracy. So whenever you have a manual process, your accuracy is going to be a little bit lower than if you have solid rules in and a tool is doing the heavy lifting for you. But I would say the other part of that is just the quality of the data. And so when you have this process that's been handed down from person to person, you kind of lose a little bit in the quality of what's produced. So for a specific example of that, the process that was in place marked green or good if an asset was in either the security event monitoring tool, so the log aggregator, or if it was in this configuration analysis tool that we have. And so if the asset was in either of those, we're good. We're being monitored for events. However, it didn't go a layer deeper and say, well, okay, so I didn't see the asset in my log aggregator. That's bad. I did see it in my configuration analysis tool. However, there is a setting in the configuration analysis tool that has to be turned on in order for the logs from the asset to make it there. And so there, the process that was in place didn't check that. It just checked for presence of the asset in that tool. And it was like, oh, we're good to go. And that's not going to pass audit, and that's not going to leave you in a good security place if, yeah, the asset's in the configuration tool, but the asset is not sending its logs. So that was one thing that we improved the quality on. We also improved the quality on the if an asset had antivirus or not. And so their rules were pretty blanket. You know, if it's in it, we're good, and if it's not, we're bad. However, some assets couldn't take the antivirus, and so there's a manual effort every quarter to go through and say, well, you know, we didn't see these 10 assets in our antivirus, but we know they perform this function. They have an exception to that rule, and so we're good to go. And so that was like a manual comparison. So I know these are all variations of the time improvement, but it did it, you know, it slowed things down. And then if you bring on a new resource who doesn't have the tribal knowledge to know that, well, these 10 assets shouldn't have antivirus. So when you're done with your report, you have to then exclude them. So all that sort of tribal knowledge and the rules and the deeper dive into the configuration of the asset in the security tools, all of that can be built automatically into NorthStar. So that way your checks tell you that ahead of time. And when you're bringing on new resources to do it, or you're doing it yourself, it does save you time and improve accuracy and quality of the data.
So you were able to improve your reporting and not only improve your data quality, but also enriching your data all through automation. So what was the process like in terms of building that?
Yeah, so that's one of the other reasons why I'm a big NorthStar fan, is all of that is done from the front end. And so while I do have the ability to muck around in scripts and coding and other stuff, it's not where I want to spend my time. And so I do love that NorthStar allows us to write those rules in the front end and use very simple things to compare data and to aggregate data. So things like, does this field start with a certain set of characters? Does a certain number or an IP address fall within a certain range? So all these things are just drop downs from the front end. I don't have to write regex if I don't want to. I can, and NorthStar does accept that, but I don't have to. I can use very simple tools from the front end, and it makes it easier for me to pass this process along to people on my team. They don't necessarily need to have a scripting background. And when we're explaining it to others, we could actually just take a screenshot and show them, and they could understand it. It's not a block of code. Yeah, I would say there's many reasons why I chose NorthStar for this task, and that was one of them.
Yeah, this is a problem that we've seen with many of the organizations and security teams that we work with. Probably the biggest issue is that when the organization needed to solve a very specific problem, they took on the effort of building that process and building that solution internally. And for a while, it worked perfectly fine. It did what it needed to do. But over time, those teams seem to suffer from some, the problems of maintaining that solution over time. And usually the sentiment is, the teams feel like they're being pigeonholed because that process is very rigid, it's very custom, and unfortunately the organization changes. The needs of the organization change, and because of that, the technology becomes very difficult to hand off, becomes difficult to maintain the knowledge to keep it working. And usually it's not uncommon for us to hear stories from teams that, essentially start out with, we built this really interesting solution. It did what we needed to do, but the one key person who understood the technology has retired or moved on, and now this solution is just a black box. It sort of does what we need it to do still, but ultimately we're afraid to play around with it or try and update it because we're afraid we're going to break it, and that's going to be unacceptable to the organization. It's a very common problem, so it is something that we've heard quite often.
Thanks, Kevin. And so for Matt, I've got another question for you. So it sounds like you were able to transform your program and solve a lot of the pressing issues, within the organization. So what type of feedback did you get from your stakeholders?
Yeah, I mean, the internal response was great. I got a little gift basket from the poor lady who was doing this. She lives up in New Hampshire, and she sent me a little gift basket and a thanks. She's like, I can actually like free up a week and a half, 2 weeks of my time every quarter now to do real stuff. And she loved it. And she's like, whatever you need, I know you want to expand this in the company, so I will go to bat for you. I will sing the praises. And she did actually. So the immediate effect was it really eased some of our audit pressure, because at audit time, we didn't always find everything. And so we had some hits on the audit that were like, well, this system is a critical system and it doesn't have this security tool. I'm like, oh man. And so it eased pressure in the audit. And then really it was part of my master plan to build a baseline of assets in general, just so I could properly do vulnerability management. So when the time came to fight the fight and have the discussions about, let's bring in a real tool to do vulnerability management here instead of Excel. And so when that came, I had that person I talked about. She came to bat for me. She had the ear of the CISO, and she was like, "Yeah, I mean, we love it. It saves us so much time, and it builds this great foundation." So the internal response was positive, and we were able to expand NorthStar into our vulnerability management program, and that's a discussion for another time. But it took all of the manual work in that and lifted it off as well. So really internally, it's not only a great time saver, but it improves our security posture because we have daily visibility into the security tools that are out there, where they're deployed, if they're configured properly, and then it basically solves the problem of, well, I can't protect what I can't see. And so it's the response has been nothing but positive.
Matt, do you have any additional best practices that you would like to share with the audience?
Yeah, just to say that my philosophy, which has served me well, is that you build the foundation you build the foundation before you start doing any of the higher level security stuff. It just puts you in a good place. It helps you protect what you can't see. And I think NorthStar helps with that process more than any other tool I have used or seen on the market. It understands IT data better than most, and it's a tool that your team can use rather than just a few people on your team who are skilled at scripting or whatever. So yeah, I'm a fan.
Matt and Kevin, thanks for joining us today for the discussion. Let's go ahead and open up to the audience for Q&A.